Our sermon reading is from Hebrews, the 2nd chapter. It only makes sense that God, by whom and for whom everything exists, would choose to bring many of us to his side by using suffering to perfect Jesus, the founder of our faith, the pioneer of our salvation. As I will show you, it's important that the one who brings us to God and those who are brought to God become one. Since we are all from one Father, this is why Jesus was not ashamed to call us his family, saying in the words of the psalmist, "I will speak your name to my brothers and sisters when I praise you in the midst of the community." And in the words of Isaiah, "I will wait for the eternal one." And again, "Look, here I am, what the children of God has given me." Since we, the children, are all creatures of flesh and blood, Jesus took on flesh and blood, so that by dying he could destroy the one who held power over death, the devil, and destroy the fear of death that has always held people captive. So notice, his concern here is not for the welfare of the heavenly messengers, but for the children of Abraham. He had to become as human as his sisters and brothers, so that when the time came, he could become a merciful and faithful high priest of God, called to reconcile a sinful people. Since he has also been tested by suffering, he can help us when we are tested. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This community had been going through a time where things just kind of got stagnant. The zest of life just wasn't quite there anymore. And it's because the fear had gone away. You know, fear can be a great motivator. Fear can really get you moving. Fear can get you to work at your highest level when you have fear motivating you. But the problem is, if fear is the thing motivating you, then you always have to have fear of something. And so at first, this community got founded and they were solidified as a community because they were afraid of the people around them. There were people persecuting them because they were the wrong type of religion. That those were the strange Christians who were taking on this new teaching and were trying to overthrow what people had known for thousands of years, so they were under persecution, and that fear actually bonded them together. And it gave them a certain amount of zest and zeal that they could keep on going and living this life of what it meant to be a Christian, because they had this constant fear. And then that kind of started to subside. That constant push of fear was going away, and as the push of fear went away, so did their zest, so did their zeal. They had no gusto anymore. They lost it. And so this letter is saying, well, Jesus came not to push you with fear. He came to take away fear and to allow you to live into the fullness of life, not out of fear, but out of joy, out of gratitude, by destroying fear, by setting you free. And that is a completely different motivator. It takes more work. It takes a lot more work, because you have to find that wellspring of energy within you, but you work on it, and then you can keep on going without having fear constantly pressing against you. Now, I don't know if you have felt this, if you've been in a situation where fear was a motivator, but I've noticed it on trips with youth. Last week I talked about youth, so it kind of just got me thinking about it. And with youth, I've been on some very high-level trips. One of them was to the Boundary Waters up in northern Minnesota. And when you're out there, and especially when you're out there with a bunch of kids from Texas, it's scary. Because in July, you can get to 40 degrees. That's scary. And rainy and windy, and that was scary. And these kids had never really been out in the wilderness before. These were city slicker kids from Austin. They had no idea what they were getting into, and they were scared. And that fear brought them together. It was amazing. That fear brought them together. They banded together. They helped each other. They warmed each other. They boiled water for their feet because they were getting cold. They helped each other make an emergency shelter. They were banded together. But then that fear went away. The sun came out and it was nice. And they didn't have that fear to keep pushing them anymore. And there needed to be something else to motivate them, something else to sustain them, something else to keep them going. And that's when we made the switch. That's when we made the switch of saying, hey, we don't have to just survive out here. We don't have to just try and stay warm for the sake of making it through another day. We can actually enjoy this. And they were a little leery of that, like, really? Enjoy this? How? And Jessica and we're seasoned veterans out there. So we're like, well, this is how you enjoy it. And Jessica taught the girls how to pull flowers and string them into little braids and things and put them in their hair. I ended up with a few in my beard. We taught them how to fish, and one of the boys, he had come and he was ready to fish, but he had never fished before. So he caught a fish, but he was afraid to touch it. And so I said, well, you don't get to eat that fish until you clean it. So I taught him how to clean a fish. We cooked it that night, and oh my gosh, that really filled him up with energy. Taking a fish out of that water, putting it into the pan with some butter and some lemon pepper, and then he drank the juices out of the pan. He was so happy to have had that fish. And then the sun came out. The sun came out and it was glorious. It was 70. We said, this water isn't always just a threat. We can just jump in it and swim and have fun. So we did. We jumped in and we swam when we had fun. And then all of a sudden, we got even closer. And that energy, the enthusiasm that was coming from the joy of life had lasting effects. We came back to Austin, and it's like there was a wave of the Holy Spirit that was following us, that was coming with us, this energy that just came exuding from us, because it wasn't just this fear of death that had brought us together, but now it was this joy of life. This joy of feeling the abundance of what God has to give us, this new community that is sustaining us. There was food and there was water, and we could depend on each other. We were living out of joy, not just out of fear. And that joy, it kept on sustaining that group. When I showed up at that church, there was no youth group. And by the time I left that church, there was 30 kids all banded together who were ready to do life together, not just because of fear, but because of joy. And we had made that transition. And I feel like sometimes in life, we get stuck in those patterns too, where we live out of fear, where we think, well, what I have to do in life is figure out how can I get through tomorrow. So I work. And I work not for the sake of joy, but I work for the sake of having enough so that I can pay the bills and get my food and get to tomorrow. That's living out of fear, right? Living out of fear says, well, I don't know when that food is going to run out, so I'm going to hoard as much food and as much money as I can so that I don't have to live in fear, right? So I'm going to keep running from fear. I'm going to hoard as much as I can so I can sustain myself. And when I do that, I care really just about me because, well, other people become a liability when you're living out of fear because maybe you're going to need something from me. And if you need something from me, that's going to deplete what I have. And that, again, is living out of fear. And we get stuck in that mode of, well, I just need to take care of myself. That's what Martin Luther called sin. Always focusing in on yourself, always focused on that fear. That's the power of sin. That's the power of devil. You get stuck in fear, and fear turns you in on yourself. You forget about your community. You forget about the God who has provided everything for you. And Jesus came to get in the middle of that, to cut that out and say, stop worrying about fear, but live into the newness of life. We believe in the God who created everything. And there is enough food, there is enough water, there is enough on this world for everyone. So you don't have to keep your neighbor at an arm's distance, but bring them close because they can be an asset. Together you can work together for this life. You don't have to hoard all of your food. There is enough for tomorrow, so live in the joy of today rather than rationing every little bit, you have a feast, you have a banquet, and that is the sign of communion. That every single week we get together to have a banquet. It's the feast that never ends. That we believe that at this table of mercy, at God's creation, there is enough for every single person. And there will always be enough for every single person. That we can live out of joy and share what we have. That we don't have to be afraid of what will come for tomorrow, but we can live in the freedom of knowing that God does and will provide for tomorrow. So find your joy, find that inner joy when we can get together and remind each other, yes, we do life for joy, not just out of fear. We are here for one another to demonstrate for a world that it is possible. That when people are in need, there are others who will step up. That when someone is hungry, someone else has food to share. And they can share it because God will keep providing more. And the kids got to experience that with me in Milwaukee as we were doing our mission work last week. They got to experience what it means to live out of their abundance. The people who we worked with have said to me, I just can't believe that you've got a group of kids who are willing to pay money to come over here and work for us. To do work, to do service. That's what they're doing. They pay money to come over here and serve. Why are they willing to do that? Why would they be willing to pay to go and serve? And for me, that's the answer is right here. It's the cross. We believe in a God who came down, who became flesh and blood to be our servant. And so we live that way in the world. And as we serve, that type of life is fulfilling. That type of life gives you energy. Living out of fear, it's tiring. When you're always wondering, how am I going to get to my next moment, to my next minute, to my next day, that's tiring. But when you can live out of the joy and abundance of knowing that God will and has provided and we can share with one another and you can serve those around you, that gives you energy and joy and enthusiasm to keep on living as a child of God. So tap into that source of energy. Live out of joy. Don't live out of fear. Live out of freedom that God has given you, that Jesus came to be just like you and me, to experience the world, to say, even when it gets hard, I know what that's like, and I will continue to be with you. But as you do this, share love with one another, serve one another, and I will continue to call you my family, my brothers and my sisters. Live the way God calls you, and you will be my family here on earth. So live out of joy, live out of freedom, because that's what Jesus came for. Amen.